coming up on Lawmakers. A federal appeals court asked a district judge to reconsider his ruling that Georgia's voter ID law is unconstitutional. Senator Chip Rogers introduces new comprehensive immigration reform legislation. And Speaker of the House Glenn Richardson responds to the suggestion that the Ten Commandments bill passed by the House is unconstitutional. Those stories and more are coming up next.
This is Lawmakers, your source for all the news from under the Gold Dome. Here are your anchors, Gerald Bryant and Wandy Lawson.
Good evening, everyone. Also on Lawmakers, the Senate Judiciary Committee reestablishes a study committee to continue looking at juvenile justice reform.
And the second part of our report about the Katie Beckett waiver, but our lead story tonight, court action on Georgia's voter ID law. Well, there is still an injunction in place blocking the enforcement of Georgia's voter ID law. However, the federal appeals court in Atlanta today sent the case back to a lower court to reconsider a ruling that the law was unconstitutional. That action was taken because of a new voter ID bill approved by the Georgia General Assembly last month. The revised bill makes free voter IDs available. The new law still has to be cleared by the Department of Justice, and pending review by District Judge Harold Murphy, the temporary injunction blocking enforcement stays in effect. We'll have more on that story from Tom Crawford of CapitolImpact.com later in our broadcast.
In other news, Senator Chip Rogers has filed a bill that he says will provide the state with comprehensive immigration reform. He says the bill will set the standard for how Georgia will carry out federal and immigration laws. Lawmakers' Jesse Freeman has more on that story. Jesse.
Well, in Wandy, Senator Chip Rogers says Senate Bill 529 is the culmination of years of work. Much of that work has been done in the last month, in which Rogers has refocused his efforts from Senate Bill 170 to SB 529. Both bills would limit government services to people with proof of legal residence. Senator Chip Rogers calls SB 529 a comprehensive immigration reform bill.
Well, it codifies the federal law as far as how do we as a state comply with the federal law. You'll see throughout the bill that we mention the federal law, particularly as it pertains to public benefits. And what we're simply saying is this: the law is the law. How does Georgia and Georgia citizens and those people residing in Georgia comply with that law?
Like SB 170, SB 529 deals with limiting access to government services, but it focuses more on business and law enforcement issues.
I think the one thing everyone can agree on is that we don't want human smuggling. We don't want coyotes. We don't want people bringing people across the border for the purposes of prostitution. Those people who have committed felonies in other countries or other states, we want them out of our communities. So I think I've really, over the last few weeks, begun to focus on law enforcement, and I think that we can put some real teeth in this bill.
Rogers credits Senator Sam Zamarripa with helping him work on the bill.
Rule of law is important to our constituents. So he has demanded that we look at the rule of law. And what I've done is say, okay, let's look at the rule of law, but let's figure out the way to implement the provisions of that law without, say, damaging the role of a social worker or a public health nurse or a teacher.
But Zamarripa says there is still room for compromise.
The bill touches on areas related to secondary education, higher education, and I'm going to ask Senator Rogers, and I have asked him to give some thought to how we make it clear that the regents are independent from this decision.
SB 529 may have a committee hearing as early as next week. And SB 529 would also restrict state governments from contracting with companies that use undocumented workers and would impose stiff penalties for human smuggling. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Jesse Freeman.
In other news, House Speaker Glenn Richardson today responded to the suggestion that a bill permitting the posting of the Ten Commandments, which passed the House last week, is unconstitutional. Georgia State law professor Lynn Hogue, one of the drafters of House Bill 941, wrote the Speaker on Monday to inform him that his view of the bill had changed. Richardson says he remains committed to passing the measure.
I wish he had told me that privately before he faxed out a letter to me and the press. I had not heard that before, and we'll look at it carefully. Our goal is to adopt a sound policy that represents the values of the citizens of this state. We believe the citizens of this state wish to allow public display of the Ten Commandments, and we're going to try to fashion an amendment that will permit that in light of the professor's opinions. But I have separate counsel looking at that now. And there's actually conflicting opinions, and I know this is going to be news to some, but the Supreme Court of the United States has changed.
Richardson also told reporters that he is introducing a resolution to hang a portrait of former House Speaker Tom Murphy in the Capitol, but he stopped short of endorsing other plans to place new portraits, such as the measure to place a picture of Coretta Scott King near the portrait of Martin Luther King, Jr.
I have a reluctance to hang very many photos in the Capitol that are not elected officials. I know Dr. King's he has a lot of significance, but there's actually a request right now to hang photos of other people that are non-elected officials, and I don't want to go through the list, but Representative Brooks has a list of civil rights leaders, and I can't call the lady's name, Rosa Banks, or Parks. Rosa Parks, he's got a list of people, and he wanted all of their photos hung in the Capitol. And I actually said, well, are all those people from Georgia? And they're not.
Speaker Richardson says the Murphy resolution has been drafted and could be introduced in the House next week. Well, the House today approved an expansion of the state's newborn screening program and a standard fee for the service. House Bill 1066 increases the number of genetic tests performed on newborns from 13 to 29. The service, which is now free, would cost as much as $40, payable by individuals, insurance plans, or Medicaid. Representative Judy Manning explained that the change would save lives and money, but one opponent doubted her claim. First, Representative Manning.
There are about 6,000 initial abnormal screenings that are brought to bear when the tests are made. Out of those, there are about 136 newborns treated each year with these disorders. The actual cost that it will save the state of Georgia per year is about $70 million, and that's calculated on the fact that if a child is diagnosed, it usually costs about $30,000 per year per child, and there are about 136 of these children, so that's about $4 million a year, but this is every year, so it just keeps building and building and building.
I wanted to know how much the screenings actually cost, and we were not sure, or were not given a clear answer. They guesstimated approximately $75. So my question was, why don't we stipulate in the bill the actual fee instead of $40 as $75? And the reasoning behind that was they felt like they needed to share the burden of the cost. Well, when it really comes down to it, it's going to be all the burden of Medicare. And I don't believe there's going to be a substantial savings with this bill, if any.
House Bill 1066 passed without dissenting vote. It moves to the Senate.
Tonight we conclude our two-part series on the Katie Beckett waiver program. Lawmakers Matt Rasnick speaks with members of Cure Childhood Cancer and discusses why the Department of Community Health is denying the waiver to many Georgia families.
For many years, families of children with cancer have been eligible for enrollment in the Katie Beckett waiver program. Recently, however, state interpretation of level of care criteria is leaving a lot of Georgia families of children with cancer out of the program and with the potential for financial hardship.
The interpretation by the state has changed. Katie Beckett was created in 1982. By the mid-'80s, it had been established in Georgia. Children with cancer had always been included. They are not hospitalized 24/7, but they have to be observed for things like fevers, mouth sores, dehydration, things that could kill them that may need emergency room admission. And if they're not under 24/7 watched by the parents, they would have to be institutionalized.
Cancer survivor and college student Jessica Schmidt received the waiver.
Before they changed the rules on the Katie Beckett waiver. So we had help with this, and that was really important because of the help, she was able to, go to college, which is where she is right now. Even if you have a great insurance program, pays 80% of all of these expenses, it becomes huge. What's left over for you to pay after the insurance company gets done.
In a statement released today, the department says federal regulations require that children must meet a pediatric level of institutional care for eligibility in the Katie Beckett program. The statement goes on to read, with any Medicaid program, the department continues to evaluate the process to ensure that criteria are appropriate and the process equitable.
It is tearing families apart, and this is a tiny percent of the state budget. We're talking about 1/10 of 1% of the entire state budget, 4/10 of a percent of the Department of Community Health budget. So we're not talking about a lot of money, but a few $1,000s here or there can save a family, a middle-class, hard-working family, from total financial ruin.
The House is expected to resolve this issue in the coming weeks. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Matt Raznick.
The Senate Judiciary Committee today passed legislation that would reestablish a study committee to continue looking at juvenile law reform. It also discussed a bill that allows the power of attorney to switch from parent to grandparent for specific situations. David Zelsky joins us live from the Capitol with more. David.
On Wendy, Senator Bill Hamrick has been working on a new juvenile code for over the past year, which deals with minors who commit heinous crimes, but believes extending the study committee for another year through Senate Resolution 700 is necessary for an issue this sensitive.
A major concern is that when you send them to an institutional type facility, that starts a process where they are not served well. A lot of people think that they're best served in communities where you can have parental involvement or you can have some personal involvement with them, as opposed to the impersonal institutional type setting. So we're trying to make some changes there. On the other hand, we want to give juvenile judges the authority they need, because they deal with the cases on a day-to-day basis and they see the facts of the case, and so we got to strike the right balance.
After passing Senator Hamrick's legislation, the Senate Judiciary Committee heard from Senator Renee Unterman, who says she wants the committee to take their time perfecting Senate Bill 420.
Senate Bill 420 is the Grandparents Act bill, and what it does, it expands the powers and the abilities of grandparents to take care of grandchildren. It also encompasses low-income grandparents paying them to be able to take care of their grandchildren.
What's a situation where something like this why it may need to happen?
Well, there's a groundswell of support. It's supported by the Council on Aging throughout the whole state of Georgia. It was their #1 issue because a lot of grandparents, unfortunately, are having to take care of grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Again, the Juvenile Study Committee extension, Senate Resolution 700, passed, but the committee agreed with Senator Unterman that they needed to take a little more time on Senate Bill 420 before sending it to Senate Rules. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm David Zelsky.
The House today agreed to allow children of active military personnel up to 5 excused absences from school when a parent is being deployed or returning from service. Representatives Mike Cohen and Al Williams told their colleagues that attempts to address this issue at the local school board level had been unsuccessful. The state law, they say, would allow families important bonding time without compromising instruction. House Bill 984 passed without dissent and now moves to the Senate.
Well, it's the end of another legislative week. That means it's time to check in with Tom Crawford, national editor of CapitolImpact.com. I begin by asking Tom about today's court ruling concerning Georgia's new voter ID law.
Well, just before I came over here to talk to you, Gerald, I received a notice that the Court of Appeals, which had control of the lawsuit on the voter ID bill, has sent it back to Judge Harold Murphy at the district court level and instructed him to take another look at it in light of SB 84, a bill that the General Assembly approved a couple of weeks ago to try to fix some of the weaknesses in the voter ID law. Now, the significant thing about this is a largely procedural issue that normally wouldn't matter. The Court of Appeals, I understand, has left in effect or left intact the injunction that prevents the state from enforcing this voter ID requirement. So for the time being, the state still cannot enforce this law, and we'll have to wait now and see what Judge Murphy decides to do with it.
Interesting developments there. Another thing that happened this week was Governor Perdue weighed in on eminent domain. Tell us about the repercussions of that.
Well, the governor had said last week that he was going to try to draft his own version of the bill on what he calls the most visceral issue he has seen in a lifetime in politics, and I think a lot of folks around here would agree with that. He introduced it yesterday, or disclosed yesterday, what his lawyers have drawn up for him, and that will probably be the bill that does get adopted to deal with the eminent domain issue. Now, the Democrats introduced their own version of eminent domain legislation about a week ago, and probably a little unhappy that the governor is taking away the issue from them. Also, Senator Jeff Chapman in the Senate, who is a Republican, has been a leader on the eminent domain issue, and he has sort of been moved aside a little bit too. But in any event, the governor's bill will now become the vehicle that is debated as the General Assembly moves forward on this issue.
And the Democrats are saying they're kind of taking a wait and see as far as a constitutional amendment, saying there was no caucus position yet, but they seem to be leaning on the side of a constitutional amendment not being necessary.
Yeah, that's the approach that they're taking. In the end, some sort of legislation that puts limits on eminent domain is going to pass. And as far as property owners out in the state are concerned, that's probably the important thing.
It is political season, and from the House, we have someone throwing their hat in the ring for Labor Commissioner. Tell us about that.
Rep. Chuck Scheid, who is a House member from Cherokee County and a Republican, announced earlier this week that he will run for Labor Commissioner, where he will probably be facing the incumbent, Mike Thurman, if Commissioner Thurman does decide to run for another term. Chuck Scheid says he wants to do away with the office. He says that you can downsize the Labor Department, make it an agency under the governor's office, and maybe save the taxpayers a little money. So makes it an interesting race just in that aspect.
You must admit that it's an interesting platform to run if you're going to do away with the department that you're running to head.
That's right. Vote for me and I'll fire myself.
All right, on a sadder note, a couple of losses in the Senate over this past weekend. Frank Eldridge, who was not only a longtime state senator, but also Secretary of the Senate, and former Senator Renee Kemp, both passed away. Your thoughts on them, Tom?
Well, it is a sad moment and a sad day for the Senate, as Lieutenant Governor Mark Taylor said. I had the opportunity to know Frank and Renee over the years, and they always struck me as being very good public servants, people who really tried to do the job that they were given the right way, and I joined with their families in mourning their loss.
Indeed, they were both dedicated public servants, and they will be missed. Tom Crawford, National Editor of CapitalImpact.com. Thanks for joining us on Lawmakers, Tom.
Glad to be here.
A bill that would pave the way for a voting paper trail passed the committee today. It could test new voting machines in 3 Georgia counties. Senate Bill 500 would require the state to compare paper records to electronic votes for any discrepancies. Lawmakers J.R. Charles sat in on today's hearings. Now, J.R., I understand that these machines are expensive, so one might think that these tests might cost the counties a lot of money.
Well, that's right, Wandy, but it actually won't cost the counties anything. Under Senator Stevens' bill, the state would pay the $50,000 tab to try out these new machines. Based on the results, the state could then decide if it wanted to update its 29,000 voting machines. Georgia's electronic voting machines don't have the ability to create a paper trail. Senator Bill Stevens wants to change that, but he wants to make sure it works first.
If the existing equipment doesn't have that capability, then you certainly don't want to get into retrofitting 24,750 voting machines around the state without at least having tested it in a very limited ways.
Under the legislation, the state would test the machines in Bibb, Camden, and Cobb counties during the 2006 election. If they passed that test, the machines would be used to count any contested elections. But that doesn't satisfy concerns from some committee members.
I know, just as some of the speakers have said today, that you can program a computer to do whatever you want to do. I know about the source codes. I went through all of that myself. So no, you saying or someone saying that you actually voted for Harsina Tate isn't going to make me feel like you actually voted for me unless I can see something that says that and they are cross-checked. That's the whole point. I mean, you can...
Now, if it's approved by the state, voters could see these machines by the 2008 election. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm J.R. Charles.
In other news, the House today approved new district lines for 3 areas of the state. The consent reapportionment procedure allowed representatives to submit district maps. According to Majority Leader Jerry Keene, this means that all of the proposed changes are unchallenged. But House Bill 1137 drew fire from Democratic leaders.
One that wasn't talked about at all is what happens on the coast, and I'm sure we say, well, we're just going to put some islands back together. But this does put East Beach in Mr. Keene's district. And I know there's a little uncomfort with some about mentioning this, but in the name of cleaning up districts and precincts lines, you have to wonder if there is some other agenda.
For the first time in history, when the judges had to draw the maps, they split a barrier island on the coast. Now, do you know why the judges had to draw a map? Because the maps that the former leadership drew in 2001 were ruled unconstitutional by every judge that looked at them.
House Bill 1137 passed 114 to 52 and now moves to the state Senate.
Well, the Senate today voted to revise the pay structure of many county officials around the state. Senator Brian Kemp explains who would get pay raises under the provisions of Senate Bill 450.
I rise today to ask your support for Senate Bill 450, bringing this bill on behalf of the County Officers Association of Georgia, which is your sheriffs, your tax commissioners, your probate judges, and your clerk of Superior Court. I am working off a committee substitute. There was a couple of the numbers that were calculated wrong. We fixed that in the committee, and we're working off the committee substitute. Senate Bill 450 merges and unifies the three minimum salaries for the probate judge, the clerks, and the tax commissioners into one common amount for each population bracket. It also recalculates the minimum salaries for sheriffs, tax commissioners, clerk of courts, and judges of the probate court to be reflective of the cost of living adjustment that has been given through January 2006, and this is also adjusted by a 2.5% raise. Senate Bill 450 also provides for a longevity pay increase for county commissioners. It also provides for recalculation of minimum salaries in any year in which the Department of Community Affairs publishes a census estimate for that county that is higher than the preceding decimal census.
Senate Bill 450 passed by substitute. The vote was 50-0, and the measure goes to the House.
Well, the Senate and House agree February 6th should be designated as Ronald Reagan Day in Georgia. Senator John Douglas speaks on behalf of House Bill 713.
He embarked on a course of cutting taxes and government expenditures throughout his tenure. In foreign policy, he sought to achieve peace through strength. During his 2 years, he increased defense spending by 35%, but also sought to improve relations with the Soviet Union. In dramatic meetings with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, he negotiated a treaty that would eliminate intermediate-range nuclear missiles. He declared war, the first president to do so, declared war on international terrorism, sending American bombers against Libya after evidence came out that Libya was involved in an attack on American soldiers in a West Berlin nightclub. After all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. Ronald Reagan brought us together. He brought us back. He made us believe. He was certainly one of the greatest presidents in the history of this country. And ladies and gentlemen, I would ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 713.
Having passed both the Senate and the House, the Reagan Day legislation is headed to Governor Perdue for his signature.
Today, the Georgia Citizens Coalition on Hunger marched outside the state capitol. The event marked the 26th annual Poor People's Day. Two of the main issues discussed at the demonstration were state funding for MARTA and an increase in state funding for Grady Hospital.
We're here to take action, and we're here to say up and out of poverty now.
That we pledge to work until we get living wages for hardworking families that are struggling to put food on their tables and heat in their homes. We pledge to work hard to get universal health care for every citizen in the state of Georgia that needs it. If Europeans can have it and Canadians can have it, so can Georgians and every citizen in this country.
I'm surprised that we don't have more conversation up here on this hill with our governor about finding and replacing those jobs that we lost right here on the south side of Atlanta.
When you look at the legislation that's been passed since we've been here, it does not help poor people. It does not help working people. It does not help people of color. It does not help people of conscience, for that matter.
But everybody in the region used MARTA and Grady.
Right.
But who paid for it? These two counties.
Georgia is the only state in the nation that has a regional transportation system that the state does not provide 1 penny for.
And finally tonight, the State Senate has a new secretary. Frank Eldridge, the man who held that post for many years, passed away last week. This morning, his longtime assistant, Bob Ewing, was the unanimous choice of senators to fill that post.
Members of the Senate, our grandparents and parents always told us that hard work would be rewarded. This is a man that has worked hard. He has prepared himself. He has made many, many sacrifices to serve this body. He's made many, many sacrifices to have the opportunity to take the oath of office as our Secretary of the Senate. And we're very, very proud of you, Bob. And if you would now put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. I do hereby solemnly swear.
I do hereby solemnly swear.
That I will discharge my duties faithfully.
That I will discharge my duties faithfully.
And to the best of my skill and knowledge.
To the best of my skill and knowledge.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
This is indeed a bittersweet occasion. Frank taught me a lot over the years that I served as his assistant. His passing has taken quite a toll on our office. Frank had the honor to serve among great men and women. I have had the privilege to serve great men and women. I am honored and humbled by your faith in me, and I pledge to each and every senator to do my utmost to make this as seamless a transition as humanly possible. I'd like to send out a special thanks to the loves of my life, my children Jessica and Benjamin, who is here today, my parents Liz and Larry Duryea, and my sister Liesl Mims, who could not make the trip, and to all of my staff and friends, especially Hamilton McWhorter Jr., who have taught me so much about life. Thank you for your words of comfort and support.
Now, on Monday, the Senate will have a memorial service for Mr. Eldridge, who, in addition to being Secretary of the Senate, had also served many years as a state senator. Well, lawmakers will not be seen tomorrow because the Georgia General Assembly will not be in session. Lawmakers returns Monday, February 13th at 7 with all the latest from under the Gold Dome. Coming up Tuesday on GPB, be sure to tune in for a special Frontline about the meth epidemic. Then at 9, stay tuned for our own David Zelski's documentary, The Georgia Meth Invasion, at 10 o'clock. If you've missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow morning when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. Now stay tuned for Prep Sports Plus. That's coming up next here on GPB.
And that's our broadcast for this, the 16th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Wandi Lawson.
And I'm Gerald Bryan. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
Good night.
Production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.